Right in the middle of my daughter's 18th birthday party, my mother tapped a silver spoon against her champagne flute to toast my brother's recent success in front of 50 guests. She smiled for the cameras, oblivious to the fact that the entire $50,000 college fund she had just drained to pay his gambling debts was being actively traced. I stood near the coat rack, holding a forged withdrawal slip she was certain I would never find. My name is Clara. I'm 38 years old, and I investigate financial fraud for a living. I track hidden assets, uncover forged signatures, and dismantle money laundering schemes. By stealing from her own granddaughter, my mother handed me the exact paper trail I needed to send her golden child to federal prison. The flashing lights of 3 police cruisers were already reflecting off the restaurant windows. Before I tell you how I tore down their facade that night, tell me your age in the comments and let me know what time it is where you are watching from. If you have ever been bled dry by toxic family favoritism, hit like and subscribe to Sweet Life Drama. Trust me, you will want to hear every single detail of this retaliation. Now let me take you back to a Sunday dinner 1 month before the birthday. My mother Beatrice lived in a sprawling colonial house she kept pristine for guests. That evening, my daughter Chloe brought her early acceptance letter to the dinner table. She had earned a partial academic scholarship for her undergraduate studies, but we had meticulously saved $50,000 in a joint trust to cover her living expenses, textbooks, and a potential master's degree. Chloe slid the thick envelope across the mahogany table toward her grandmother. Her hands were shaking with excitement. Beatrice barely glanced at the university seal. She took a sip of her Pinot Noir, pushed the envelope aside, and turned her attention to the end of the table. Harrison sat there swirling his glass. He was 42 years old and had never held a job longer than 6 months. Yet, in my mother's eyes, he was an unappreciated genius waiting for his big break. He wore a designer watch I knew he could not afford and talked loudly about a new logistics startup he was allegedly founding. He had no business plan, no investors, and no experience, but Beatrice listened to him as if he were giving a master class. My husband David placed his hand over mine under the table. David is a dedicated high school history teacher currently waiting on a promotion to vice principal. We built a quiet, stable life. We paid our mortgage, saved our money, and prioritized our child. To Beatrice, our stability was boring. We were ordinary. Harrison was the star. Chloe cleared her throat, trying to pull the conversation back to her achievement. She mentioned the pre-law track she wanted to pursue. Beatrice sighed, setting her wine glass down with a sharp clink. She looked at my daughter with a patronizing smile. She said, "A degree is nice, dear, but spending 4 years reading books just to end up working for someone else is a bit narrow-minded. Look at your Uncle Harrison. He is building his own empire. You should learn from his ambition instead of settling for a desk job like your parents." The room went dead silent. David tightened his grip on my hand. I watched Chloe's face fall. The pride she carried into the room vanished, replaced by an acute, stinging shame. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. She grabbed her acceptance letter, mumbled an apology, and walked out the front door. I did not yell. I did not flip the table. Raising your voice at Beatrice only gave her the opportunity to play the victim. Instead, I looked at Harrison. He gave me a lazy, triumphant smirk. He knew he owned the room. I stood up, collected our coats, and told David it was time to leave. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel while Chloe cried softly in the back seat. That night was supposed to be a celebration of my daughter's hard work. Instead, it was another sacrifice at the altar of Harrison's ego. I decided right then that we were done playing these games. I just did not realize how far my mother had already gone to protect him. 2 weeks before the 18th birthday party, the house was quiet. David had left early for the high school to prep his classroom for midterm exams. Chloe was at morning track practice. I sat alone in my home office with a cup of black coffee, booting up my dual monitors. It was a standard Tuesday. I planned to log into the Education Trust portal, transfer the first semester tuition to the university routing number, and order a custom cake for the weekend celebration. I typed in my credentials. The loading wheels spun on the screen. The bank portal refreshed. My eyes moved to the top right corner of the dashboard, where the total balance usually sat in bold green font. I blinked. I leaned closer to the monitor. The font was black. The number read $0.00. I stopped breathing. The ceramic coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the edge of the desk. Hot brown liquid splattered across my keyboard and soaked into my jeans, but I did not feel the burn. The roaring sound of my own pulse filled my ears, drowning out the quiet hum of the computer tower. A system glitch. A scheduled maintenance error. I slammed my index finger down on the refresh key. The screen blinked white. $0.00. I slammed it again. And again. I hammered the plastic key until my knuckle ached, desperate to force the green numbers back onto the monitor. 0, 0, 0. My vision blurred. I pushed my rolling chair back so violently it crashed into the bookshelf behind me. That money was 18 years of skipped vacations, packed lunches, and late-night overtime shifts erased in a single digital breath. I gripped the edges of the desk, my knuckles turning white, gasping for air like I had just been dragged underwater. The physical urge to scream, to tear the monitors off their mounts, vibrated through my teeth. I dug my fingernails into my palms until the sharp sting grounded me. I closed my eyes and forced air into my burning lungs. One slow, measured breath. I visualized locking that raw, suffocating motherly panic inside a heavy steel box. When I opened my eyes, my hands were still trembling, but my vision was dead clear. I was no longer just a mother. I was a certified financial fraud investigator. My daily job was tracking stolen corporate assets across international borders. I hunted ghost accounts for a living. I wiped the spilled coffee off my spacebar with my sleeve, pulled my chair back to the desk, and went to work. I clicked into the detailed transaction history. The ledger showed months of steady deposits followed by a single, devastating withdrawal dated 3 days prior. The entire sum had been moved via a domestic wire transfer to a private checking account. I highlighted the routing number of the receiving institution. It belonged to a regional credit union down the street from my mother's house. I stared at the screen, letting the reality wash over me. 18 years ago, while I was still in the maternity ward holding a newborn Chloe, Beatrice had walked in with a bouquet of lilies and a stack of legal documents. She played the role of the anxious, caring grandmother flawlessly. She insisted on being listed as a secondary custodian on the trust. She argued that if David and I were ever in a fatal car accident, she needed immediate authorization to access funds for Chloe's care without fighting probate court. Sleep-deprived and vulnerable, I signed the paper. She had been sitting on that dormant access for nearly 2 decades. But a custodial status alone did not explain this. The bank mandated a verbal dual authorization protocol for any outbound transfer exceeding $10,000. She could not move that money without a phone call confirming my explicit consent. I navigated to the Authorization tab and pulled up the scanned digital logs attached to the wire. 2 PDFs loaded on the right side of my screen. The first was an in-person withdrawal slip. At the bottom of the page, on the primary account holder line, sat my signature. I zoomed in on the ink strokes. It was a very good imitation, but it was not mine. The capital C in Clara leaned too far left. The tail of the lowercase a dragged downward instead of sweeping up. The second document made my blood run cold. It was a change of contact information form submitted 3 days prior. She had forged my signature again to temporarily change my primary verification phone number to her own cell phone. Someone had walked into that bank branch, presented Beatrice's valid identification as the cosigner, handed the teller a slip bearing my forged handwriting, and then calmly answered the bank's fraud verification call pretending to be me. There was no confusion left. This was not a banking error. This was a calculated, premeditated heist executed by my own blood. I grabbed my car keys, left my phone on the desk, and walked out the door. The drive across town took 20 minutes. The sky was a crisp, clear blue, mocking the cold storm raging inside my chest. I drove past manicured lawns, pristine sidewalks, and gated driveways. Beatrice lived in a neighborhood where appearances were the only currency that mattered. I parked my car 2 blocks away from her sprawling colonial house. I did not want her to see my vehicle in the driveway. I walked up the paver stone path and retrieved the spare brass key hidden inside the hollow ceramic frog near the porch steps. The lock clicked. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped into the foyer. The house smelled of lemon polish and expensive potpourri. It was silent. Beatrice was likely at her Tuesday morning country club brunch, playing bridge and complaining about the cost of landscaping. I bypassed the living room and walked straight up the carpeted stairs to her home office. The room was a shrine to her ego. Framed photographs of Harrison lined the walls, showcasing his high school graduation, his brief stint in a tailored suit for a job he quit, and him standing next to a leased sports car. There was only one picture of Chloe, tucked behind a potted fern on the windowsill. I walked over to the heavy mahogany desk. It was perfectly organized, pens aligned, paper clips in the magnetic bowl. I opened the top drawer. Stationery, stamps, a leather-bound address book. I moved to the side drawers. Nothing incriminating. Then I looked down at the woven brass wastebasket tucked under the right side of the desk. I knelt on the thick carpet and pulled the basket out. The top layer consisted of junk mail and empty envelope sleeves. I dug deeper. Near the bottom, I felt the stiff texture of heavy cardstock. I pulled out 4 crumpled sheets of paper. I stood up, placed the crumpled wads onto the mahogany surface, and carefully smoothed them out with the palms of my hands. My heart turned to ice. Row after row, column after column, my name was written in blue ink. The top of the first page showed Beatrice's natural looping cursive trying to spell Clara Miller. As my eyes moved down the page, the handwriting morphed. She had practiced the angles, adjusted the slant, and refined the curves. By the 4th page, the signatures were nearly identical to the forgery on the bank slip. She had sat at this very desk, under the framed photos of her golden child, and spent hours perfecting the art of stealing from her teenage granddaughter. The pieces snapped together with sickening clarity. The smug look on Harrison's face at dinner, the brand-new designer watch he flashed across the table. His casual mention of a new startup venture requiring capital. He was drowning in gambling debts to dangerous people, and my mother had funded his bailout with Chloe's future. She did not just take the money, she planned it. She executed it. She covered her tracks, assuming my familial loyalty would keep me quiet once the theft was discovered. I folded the 4 sheets of cardstock and slid them into the inner pocket of my jacket. The physical weight of the paper felt like a loaded weapon against my ribs. Downstairs, the heavy mechanical hum of the garage door vibrating through the floorboards broke the silence. The side door creaked open. I heard the sharp, rhythmic click of Beatrice's heels striking the hardwood hallway. She was home. I did not run. I did not hide. I buttoned my jacket, walked out of the office, and stood at the top of the staircase, waiting for the woman who birthed me to turn the corner. The investigation was over. The hunt had just begun. My footsteps made no sound on the thick carpet as I descended the staircase. The house felt like a curated museum exhibit, perfectly staged and entirely devoid of actual warmth. From the bottom of the stairs, I heard the rustle of paper grocery bags and the distinct, wet pop of a wine cork coming from the kitchen. I paused in the hallway, letting my eyes adjust to the bright natural light flooding through the bay windows. I took one final breath to steady my racing pulse, stepped around the corner, and walked into the room. Beatrice stood at the center island. The countertops were Calcutta marble, polished to a flawless mirror finish that reflected the expensive brass pendant lights hanging above. She wore a tailored linen blouse and a single strand of pearls, looking every bit the affluent matriarch returning from a Tuesday morning charity board meeting. She held a crystal glass in one hand and a bottle of expensive white wine in the other, pouring a generous measure. When she looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, her hand did not tremble. She did not drop the bottle. A polite, hollow smile touched the corners of her mouth. Clara, dear, you startled me. She set the bottle down on a cork coaster. What are you doing here in the middle of the workday? Did David forget to pack your lunch again? I walked slowly across the pristine hardwood floor. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the 4 crumpled sheets of heavy cardstock, and laid them flat on the marble island, right next to her wine glass. I stepped back. I watched her eyes track my movement. I waited for the realization to hit. I waited for the panic, the desperate excuses, the tears, or even a fabricated lie about a banking error. Beatrice looked down at the pages of her own handwriting. She studied the countless attempts to perfectly forge my signature, the ink strokes she had practiced until she could steal $50,000 without triggering a fraud alert. She stared at the undeniable proof of her crime. Then she did something that shattered the last remaining fragment of my respect for her. She sighed, picked up her glass, and took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine. "You always were too nosy for your own good," she said. Her voice was steady and ice cold. "You should not be going through my trash, Clara. It is very unbecoming." I braced both hands against the cold edge of the island. "Where is the money, Mother? Where is Chloe's college fund?" Beatrice rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed by my tone. "Keep your voice down. The neighbors have their windows open, and I will not have you shouting like a fishwife." She walked past me, placing the wine bottle back into the stainless steel refrigerator. Harrison needed it. He got himself into a tight spot with some very unsavory individuals, people who do not send polite collection letters. He needed cash immediately to clear his debts. I felt the blood pounding in my ears. The sheer audacity of her confession knocked the breath out of my lungs. "So you stole from your own granddaughter. You forged my name and emptied an 18-year trust fund to bail out a 42-year-old man." Beatrice turned around, leaning her back against the refrigerator door. She waved her hand dismissively, brushing off a lifetime of savings as if it were pocket change. "Chloe is young. She has her whole life ahead of her. She can go to the university financial aid office like everyone else. She takes out a few student loans, works a part-time job in the campus cafeteria, and pays it off in 10 years. It builds character." Harrison did not have 10 years. He needed help today. "I am his mother, Clara. I protect my children." The hypocrisy landed like a physical blow. She protected her son by robbing her daughter and sabotaging her granddaughter. The money David and I had scraped together, clipping grocery coupons, driving 10-year-old sedans, skipping summer vacations, all of it was handed over to a man who had never worked an honest day in his life. For a fraction of a second, the iron wall I had built around my emotions crumbled. A hot, stinging tear spilled over my lower lash line, tracing a warm path down my cheek. My voice broke, thick with 38 years of unspoken grief. "And what about me, Beatrice?" I whispered, staring at the woman who gave birth to me. "Am I not your child too?" Beatrice looked at my tear. She did not soften. She did not reach out. She simply let out a heavy, exasperated sigh, as if my heartbreak was nothing more than an inconvenience to her afternoon schedule. That sigh was the final nail in the coffin. The wounded daughter inside of me died right there on the pristine hardwood floor, leaving only the fraud investigator standing in her place. I reached up, wiped the tear from my cheek with the back of my hand, and straightened my spine. The warmth left my eyes entirely. "I am going to the police," I said. My voice was no longer broken. It was dangerously quiet. "I am driving straight from here to the precinct. I am pressing charges for identity theft, fraud, and grand larceny." Beatrice stopped wiping an imaginary speck of dust off the counter. The mask of the polite, put-together matriarch vanished, replaced by a calculating predator. She took a slow step toward me, her eyes narrowing into dark, unblinking slits. "You will do no such thing," she hissed. "Think about your husband. Think about David." She let the name hang in the air, a loaded weapon pointed directly at my family's stability. "David is up for the vice principal position at the high school next month," Beatrice continued, her tone dripping with venom. That school board is incredibly conservative. They pride themselves on hiring faculty with flawless community standing. What do you think will happen when his wife drags her own mother into criminal court? When the local papers get a hold of a messy, embarrassing family lawsuit over a few pennies. She smiled, a razor-sharp curve of her lips that made my stomach turn. They will pass him over. His career will stall forever. You will humiliate him, you will humiliate Chloe, and you will destroy this family's reputation. And for what? Out of petty jealousy because I helped your brother. She had thought of everything. She had weaponized our desire for a quiet, respectable life against us. She knew David had spent 12 years building his reputation at that school, staying late to mentor students and organizing community drives. She assumed I would swallow the theft to protect his hard-earned promotion, just as I had swallowed every insult, every slight, and every blatant act of favoritism for my entire life. She looked at me with supreme confidence, waiting for me to back down, waiting for the obedient scapegoat to lower her head and accept the loss. I looked at the forged papers on the counter. Then I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. The internal war ended right there in that cold marble kitchen. The lingering guilt I felt over fighting back, the biological instinct to seek her approval, it all evaporated. She was not a misguided parent. She was a threat to my child's future. I did not yell. I did not argue. I carefully picked up the 4 pieces of cardstock, folded them, and put them back into my jacket pocket. I let my shoulders drop, projecting defeat. I broke eye contact, looking down at the floor as if the fight had drained out of me. "Enjoy your wine, Beatrice," I whispered. I turned my back on her and walked out the front door, leaving her standing in the kitchen, convinced she had won. I got into my car, shut the door, and locked it. I did not cry. My mind was already running through federal statutes, banking regulations, and wire fraud penalties. Beatrice thought she had outsmarted me with a local school board threat. She failed to realize that my jurisdiction as a fraud investigator went far beyond town gossip. But before I could trigger an investigation that would withstand a federal indictment, I needed to know exactly where that money went. Harrison never paid off his debts. He gambled. He lied. He bought flashy things to mask his failures. If I could prove he was still holding the stolen funds or funneling them into illicit operations, the case would escalate from a local family dispute to a federal crime. I needed Harrison to slip up. I needed him to flaunt his stolen wealth. And I knew exactly how arrogant he was. I just had to wait for him to come to me. The very next afternoon, the doorbell chimed. I was sitting at my kitchen island with my laptop open, tracing international routing numbers through a secure database. David was still at the high school leading an afternoon study hall, and Chloe was at the local library studying for her advanced placement exams. The house was empty and quiet. I picked up my phone and opened the front porch security application. The high-definition camera feed loaded instantly. Standing on my welcome mat was Harrison. He wore a tailored navy blazer, crisp white trousers, and a pair of Italian leather loafers. He was humming a cheerful tune, checking his reflection in the glass panes of my front door, and running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He did not look like a man who had just escaped the wrath of violent loan sharks. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. I locked my laptop screen, walked down the hallway, and pulled the front door open. Harrison stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. He bypassed me entirely, strolling into the foyer and tossing his expensive sunglasses onto the entryway table. The heavy scent of designer cologne filled the space, masking the subtle smell of lemon and cedar that usually defined my home. "You need to tell your landscaper to trim the hedges near the driveway," he said, admiring his own reflection in the hallway mirror. "They are scratching the paint on my new car." I closed the door behind him and turned around. My eyes immediately locked onto his left wrist. Resting just below the cuff of his tailored blazer was a brand new Rolex Submariner. The heavy gold and steel bracelet caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. The deep blue dial gleamed. It was a timepiece that retailed for well over $15,000. I stared at the sweeping second hand. That watch was my daughter's freshman year housing. That gold bezel was her meal plan. That sapphire crystal glass was her textbook stipend. Harrison caught my gaze. He held his wrist up, turning it slightly so the light hit the diamonds marking the hours. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he smiled, a lazy, self-satisfied grin spreading across his face. A little gift to myself for navigating a stressful business quarter. "You have to dress for the job you want, Clara. Investors respect a man who values his time." He walked past me and headed straight into the kitchen, opening my refrigerator and taking out a bottle of sparkling water. This was the core of Harrison's survival strategy. He had spent his entire adult life operating as a charming parasite. In his late 20s, he convinced his brief first wife to take out a second mortgage to fund a restaurant concept he never actually built. When the bank foreclosed on their property, he packed his bags and moved out, leaving her to handle the bankruptcy hearings alone. In his 30s, he bounced between affluent girlfriends, charming his way into their luxury apartments and bank accounts, only to vanish the moment the funds dried up or they asked him to sign a lease. He used romance and family ties as personal ATMs. He twisted the cap off the water bottle and took a long drink. "Mom called me last night," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "She said you stopped by the house and threw a little tantrum over the education trust." I stood in the doorway of the kitchen. I kept my hands folded in front of me, making sure my posture remained passive. I needed him to keep talking. I needed him to feel comfortable. $50,000 is not a little tantrum, Harrison, I said softly. She forged my signature. That money belonged to Chloe. Harrison rolled his eyes and let out a long, exaggerated sigh. He leaned against the granite counter, crossing his ankles. "Let it go, Clara. The money is gone. The debts are paid." I am breathing easy for the first time in months. Mom did what she had to do to protect her son. She will always choose me, you know that. She has always chosen me. It is time you finally accept your place in the pecking order. He took another sip of water, his eyes scanning my kitchen as if judging the quality of my appliances. "You stole from a teenager," I replied, keeping my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "I did not steal anything," he snapped back, dropping the relaxed facade for a fraction of a second. His voice grew sharp and defensive. "Mom gave it to me. She handled the paperwork. She handed me the cashier's check. If you have a problem with the logistics, take it up with her." "But you will not do that, will you? Because you are terrified of making a scene." He set the water bottle down on the counter and walked slowly toward me. He stopped less than 2 feet away, using his height to look down at me. The smug smile returned to his lips. He raised his hand and patronizingly patted my shoulder. "Listen to me very carefully," he whispered. "Chloe's birthday dinner is this Saturday. Mom invited 50 of her most influential friends, the country club crowd, the city council members, people who matter. You are going to put on a nice dress. You are going to smile. You are going to serve the cake and act like the happy, quiet little sister you have always been. If you try to ruin my celebration of being debt-free by bringing up this trivial college fund nonsense, I will personally call the school board. I will tell them David's wife is having a mental breakdown and harassing our family. I will make sure he never gets that vice principal job." He let the threat hang in the air. He and Beatrice had clearly rehearsed this narrative. They believed they had me trapped in a corner, paralyzed by the fear of ruining my husband's career and my family's social standing. They thought my silence was guaranteed. What Harrison did not know was that my home was fortified like a bank vault. When you spend your life investigating financial crimes and tracking down individuals who steal millions of dollars, you do not rely on standard home security. You install the best. Tucked neatly into the upper molding of the kitchen ceiling, disguised as a standard smoke detector, was a wide-angle, high-definition surveillance camera. It featured motion tracking, infrared night vision, and a highly sensitive omnidirectional microphone. It captured every single word spoken in that room. It captured the crisp, undeniable audio of Harrison admitting that Beatrice forged the documents. It captured his confession that he received the $50,000 cashier's check. And it captured his explicit attempt to extort my silence by threatening my husband's livelihood. I looked up at his arrogant face. I looked at the stolen Rolex on his wrist. The urge to scream at him vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating satisfaction. He had just handed me the final piece of the puzzle on a silver platter. "You make a very compelling argument, Harrison," I said softly. A slow smile spread across my face. He chuckled, clearly pleased with himself. He believed my smile was a sign of submission. "I knew you would see reason, Clara. You have always been the pragmatic one. I will see you on Saturday. Make sure the cake is chocolate. Mom hates vanilla." He walked past me, grabbed his sunglasses from the entryway table, and let himself out the front door. I watched his expensive car back out of my driveway through the front window. The moment his vehicle disappeared down the street, I walked over to the security keypad hidden inside the pantry door. I punched in my passcode, accessed the local server, and pulled up the kitchen camera feed. I clipped the last 10 minutes of footage and exported the MP4 file to an encrypted flash drive. Harrison thought the matter was settled. He thought he could use intimidation to bury his crimes. But a confession of receiving stolen funds and committing extortion crossed a very specific legal threshold. I slipped the encrypted flash drive into my pocket and picked up my phone to call a former colleague at the Federal Bureau. It was time to build a cage they could never escape. I plugged the encrypted flash drive into my dashboard port, connected my phone, and made a single phone call to a secure line. Within 2 hours, I was sitting in the back booth of a quiet diner 3 towns over, sliding a manila envelope across a sticky Formica table. The man sitting across from me was Special Agent Thomas Reed. We had worked together 5 years ago, dismantling a corporate embezzlement ring operating out of Chicago. He was methodical, quiet, and possessed a distinct hatred for white-collar criminals who exploited their own blood. Reed opened the envelope. He reviewed the forged practice signatures I had recovered from the wastebasket and compared them to the bank transfer receipt. He plugged the flash drive into his secure tablet and listened to the crisp audio of Harrison confessing in my kitchen. Then he looked up at me over the rim of his coffee cup. "This gives us undeniable probable cause," Reed said, tapping the paper. "Identity theft, forgery, extortion. I am fast-tracking a federal subpoena for the bank back-end servers right now. Once my cyber team pulls the IP address logs and legally proves the transfer originated from the router inside your mother's house, this case is bulletproof. We can hand this to the local district attorney right now. They will pick them both up by dinner." I shook my head. Local prosecution was exactly what Beatrice had threatened to use against David's career. A local trial meant local gossip, school board hearings, and a messy public spectacle that would drag my husband's name through the mud. "No," I replied. "Local authorities leak to the press. Beatrice has the mayor on speed dial and plays golf with the chief of police. She will post bail, hire an expensive defense attorney, and spin a narrative that I am a disgruntled daughter trying to extort my own family. I need this sealed, airtight, and federal. I need you to trace where Harrison sent the money." Reed nodded, sliding the documents back into the envelope. He gave me temporary portal access to the Bureau financial tracking software. For the next 48 hours, my home office became a war room. I locked the door, told David I was handling a complex offshore consulting case, and went hunting. Harrison had cashed the $50,000 check at a boutique financial branch downtown. From there, he did not hand the money over to a neighborhood loan shark. He was far too cowardly to deal with physical enforcers. Instead, he logged into a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange and wired the entire sum to a holding company registered in Nevada. I ran the holding company tax identification number through the federal database. The screen populated with red flags. The entity was a known front for an illicit sports betting and money laundering syndicate. The Bureau had been building a racketeering case against them for 6 months, lacking the final piece of digital evidence connecting local runners to the interstate accounts. Harrison had not just paid off a debt. By transferring stolen funds across state lines into a monitored illicit enterprise, he had committed federal wire fraud and actively participated in money laundering. He had elevated himself from a petty thief to a target of a federal racketeering investigation. I printed the routing ledger, the timestamp wire confirmations, and the Nevada corporate registry connecting Harrison to the syndicate. I arranged the pages in the neat stack on my desk. The trap was no longer a theory. It was a tangible, inescapable reality. While I spent my days building a federal indictment against my own family, my cell phone rang incessantly. The caller ID flashed Beatrice's name every few hours. She was in the final stages of planning Chloe's 18th birthday party, an event she had hijacked to serve her own social ambitions. She left voicemails complaining about the floral arrangements. She demanded to know if I had picked up the silk napkins. She lectured me on the importance of enforcing a strict dress code because she had invited a state senator to the dinner. On Thursday afternoon, I finally answered her call. "Clara, you are impossible to reach," Beatrice snapped, the ambient noise of a high-end salon buzzing in the background. "The catering director needs the final head count, and I hope you told David to wear his dark navy suit. The charcoal one makes him look like a mid-level accountant. We need to project success this weekend. Harrison is bringing a crucial potential investor." I stared at the federal wire fraud statutes illuminated on my monitor. The disconnect between her obsession with appearances and the legal avalanche heading her way was staggering. She was fussing over fabric swatches while I was finalizing her prison sentence. "The headcount is confirmed, Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice light and accommodating. "David will wear the navy suit." "Everything is falling right into place." "Good," she replied, her tone softening with smug satisfaction. "I knew you would come to your senses. It is going to be a beautiful evening. We are going to celebrate our family's success." She hung up. I placed the phone face down on the desk. Friday morning, Special Agent Reed called me on the secure line. He had taken my trace data to a federal judge. The warrants were signed. The local field office was mobilizing a team. "We are ready," Reed stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "We have the authorization to arrest Harrison for federal wire fraud and your mother as an accessory to grand larceny and financial forgery. We can execute the warrants at their residences tomorrow morning." I looked at the calendar hanging on my wall. Saturday, the day of the party. The day Beatrice planned to stand in front of 50 influential guests and parade her golden child as a pinnacle of success. Executing the warrants in the quiet of their homes would give them the luxury of secrecy. They would quietly bond out, hire crisis managers, and weave a web of lies to protect their social standing. They would control the narrative. I remembered the look on Chloe's face when Beatrice belittled her college acceptance. I remembered Harrison threatening David's livelihood in my own kitchen. They did not deserve the dignity of a quiet arrest. They cared about their audience more than they cared about their own blood. Therefore, the audience needed to see the truth. "No," I told Reed, "they will not be home tomorrow morning. They are hosting a private dinner at the Azure Room downtown. The reservation begins at 7. I will give you the signal at 8. Reed paused for a fraction of a second, understanding the exact nature of my request. He recognized the tactical advantage of catching targets off guard in a public venue. "Understood," Reed replied. "We will have units staging in the alley and the main lobby. Give us the green light when you are ready." I ended the call. I closed my laptop. I walked into my bedroom and looked at the garment bag hanging on the closet door. Inside was the conservative, understated dress Beatrice had instructed me to wear, a dress designed to make me blend into the background. I pushed it aside. I reached into the back of the closet and pulled out a sharp, tailored black blazer. If I was going to dismantle my mother's empire in front of her entire social circle, I was not going to do it wearing a costume of submission. I was going to dress like the executioner she had forced me to become. The Azure Room occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling glass offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. Beatrice had rented the entire private dining wing. 50 place settings featured heavy silver cutlery, crisp linen napkins, and custom-printed menus resting on gold charger plates. A string quartet played softly in the corner near the bar. The room smelled of fresh orchids, expensive roasted meat, and decades of old money. It was a masterclass in wealth projection, funded by the theft of my daughter's future. The guests began arriving at 7. They handed their coats to the attendant and accepted fluted glasses of champagne from passing waitstaff. These were not Chloe's friends. There were no high school seniors talking about graduation or summer road trips. The room was filled with local judges, real estate developers, and country club board members. They were Beatrice's peers. They were the people she needed to impress to validate her existence. I watched a city councilman shake Chloe's hand, wish her a happy sweet 16, and immediately turn away to ask the bartender for a bourbon. Chloe was turning 18. She stood near an elaborate ice sculpture, wearing a beautiful silk dress we bought months ago, looking like a stranger at her own milestone. David stood beside her like a shield. He wore his dark navy suit just as my mother had demanded. He kept his hand anchored on our daughter's shoulder, offering a silent, steady comfort amid the sea of strangers. He caught my eye across the room. I gave him a subtle nod. I had not told him about the Federal Bureau. I had not told him about the wire fraud. He thought we were simply surviving one last dinner before cutting ties forever. Keeping him in the dark was a tactical necessity. If the local school board tried to implicate him later, his genuine ignorance would be his best legal defense. I moved through the room playing my assigned part. I directed the waitstaff, checked the seating chart, and ensured the catering manager had the timing right for the dessert service. I wore my tailored black blazer. Several of my mother's friends gave me polite, pitying smiles. They viewed me as the dutiful, unremarkable daughter running errands, while the real stars of the family mingled. I accepted their condescension. I needed them relaxed. I needed the illusion to hold. At 7:30, the brass doors of the private elevator parted. Harrison made his entrance. He did not walk into the room, he held court. He wore a tailored velvet dinner jacket and walked alongside a man he introduced to everyone as his new venture capital partner. The stolen $15,000 watch gleamed under the crystal chandeliers as he shook hands and clapped backs. Beatrice materialized beside him instantly. She linked her arm through his, her face glowing with a fierce pride she never once directed at me or Chloe. She paraded him past the tables, ensuring every guest saw her successful, brilliant son. Once the guests took their seats for the first course, Beatrice caught my eye. She gave a sharp, subtle tilt of her head toward the narrow hallway leading to the kitchen. It was a summons. I handed my clipboard to the maitre d' and followed her. The hallway was dimly lit. The air smelled of hot butter and searing steaks. The heavy swinging doors muffled the jazz music from the dining room. Beatrice turned around. The polite hostess' smile vanished. Her eyes were hard and calculating. She reached out and adjusted the lapel of my black blazer, a gesture that looked maternal but felt like a physical restraint. "Listen to me," she whispered, her tone sharp and precise. "Harrison is sitting next to William Thorne. William owns half the commercial real estate in the zip code. He is heavily interested in your brother's new logistics company. This dinner is a critical networking opportunity. I need everything to go perfectly." I kept my hands at my sides. I looked at her carefully maintained makeup. I replied, "This dinner is for Chloe. It is her 18th birthday." Beatrice waved her hand, dismissing the fact as an inconvenient technicality. "Chloe will get her cake and her little song at the end of the night. But right now, we are focused on the family's future. You will sit at the table near the back. You will make sure David does not bring up his tedious teaching stories. And when Harrison gives his toast later, you will stand up and applaud. You will not look sullen. You will not mention the trust fund. You play your part, Clara. Do not ruin your brother's big night." The magnitude of her delusion hung in the narrow hallway. She had stolen $50,000 from her granddaughter, handed it to her son to funnel into a criminal syndicate, and was now ordering me to celebrate his business acumen at the very party meant for the victim of their theft. She genuinely believed her social leverage made her untouchable. She assumed my lifelong habit of keeping the peace would hold strong under the weight of her threats. I did not argue. I did not defend my daughter's right to her own birthday. I leaned into her expectation. I let a look of quiet resignation wash over my face. I gave her the exact reaction she had demanded from me for 38 years. "You are right, Mother," I said. My voice was smooth, carrying no resistance. "The seating arrangement is handled. The cake is ready. I will sit in the back. I will not say a word about the money. This night will be exactly what Harrison deserves." Beatrice relaxed. The tension in her shoulders dropped. She patted my cheek, a final demeaning seal of approval. "Good girl," she murmured. "I knew you would understand the bigger picture." She turned on her heel and pushed through the swinging doors, stepping back into the golden light of the dining room to resume her role as the flawless matriarch. I stayed in the hallway for another minute. The air felt thin. I walked past the kitchen doors toward the rear emergency exit. A small pane of reinforced glass offered a view of the street 10 stories below. The city traffic moved in steady streams of red and white light. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the encrypted messaging application. I typed 3 words to Special Agent Reed. "We are seated." I hit send. I looked down through the glass. In the alleyway, directly adjacent to the restaurant's valet loading zone, 3 dark SUVs without municipal license plates pulled to a stop. Men and women in understated business suits stepped out into the shadows. They did not carry tactical rifles or wear heavy armor. They moved with the quiet, practiced coordination of federal agents, preparing to execute a white-collar warrant, heading straight for the service elevators. Beatrice wanted an audience. She wanted a stage to project her lies and elevate her golden child. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, smoothed the lapels of my black blazer, and walked back into the dining room. The curtain was about to rise, and the spotlight was moving directly toward them. The waitstaff began clearing the dinner plates, replacing them with delicate porcelain dessert bowls. The catering manager wheeled out a massive 3-tier chocolate cake. I watched Chloe stare down at the dark frosting. She was allergic to heavy cocoa. She had preferred vanilla sponge cakes since she was a little girl. But Harrison demanded chocolate, so Beatrice ordered chocolate. It was a minor, predictable detail, but it perfectly summarized the hierarchy of our family. Birthdays were never about the person blowing out the candles. They were staged public relations events designed to reinforce the brand my mother wanted the world to see. The lights dimmed. A large, motorized projection screen descended over the floor-to-ceiling glass windows at the far end of the dining room. This was the scheduled time for the photo montage. I was supposed to play a soft, nostalgic slideshow of Chloe growing up, a sentimental backdrop for the guests to enjoy while they drank their coffee. Instead of waiting for the video to start, Beatrice stood up from her chair at the head table. She picked up a silver spoon and tapped it sharply against her crystal champagne flute. The high, clear ringing sound cut through the low hum of conversation. The string quartet lowered their bows. The room fell silent. 50 faces turned toward the matriarch. She stepped up to the small wooden podium positioned near the projection screen. The soft glow of the overhead spotlight caught the pearls at her neck. She smiled, radiating a practiced magnetic warmth. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Beatrice began, her voice projecting effortlessly across the room. "We gather this evening to celebrate a milestone. 18 years ago, my beautiful granddaughter Chloe came into this world. She is a bright, capable young woman, and we are all very proud of the adult she is becoming." She paused, offering a polite, closed-lipped smile in Chloe's direction. It was a rehearsed pleasantry, delivered with the emotional depth of a corporate memo. Then, right on cue, Beatrice pivoted. "But tonight is about more than just the passage of time," she continued, her tone shifting from polite to deeply passionate. "It is about celebrating the enduring success of our family. Many of you know my son, Harrison. You know his drive. You know his vision." I watched the guests nod. William Thorne, the commercial real estate magnate, sitting to Harrison's right, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, listening intently. "Building a business from the ground up requires immense sacrifice," Beatrice said, placing a hand over her heart. "It requires grit." Just this week, Harrison secured a massive $50,000 capital injection for his new logistics firm. He closed the deal through sheer determination, proving that true entrepreneurial spirit always yields results. Let us raise a glass to Harrison and to the bright future he is building. The room erupted into applause. Glasses clinked. Harrison stood up, buttoning his velvet dinner jacket, and offered a modest bow to the crowd. He looked at William Thorne, projecting the image of a seasoned, victorious executive. I remained seated at the back table. I let the applause wash over me. I let Harrison soak in the adoration. I let Beatrice enjoy her carefully constructed delusion for 10 more seconds. Then I stood up. I did not rush. I walked at a measured, deliberate pace down the center aisle of the dining room. The applause began to taper off as the guests noticed my movement. Beatrice saw me approaching the podium. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Her eyes narrowed into a sharp warning, silently commanding me to return to my seat and play my part. I reached the AV card, positioned next to the podium. I picked up the secondary wireless microphone resting next to the soundboard. I switched it on. "Thank you, Mother," I said. My voice echoed through the dining room speakers, calm, steady, and devoid of any familial warmth. "I think it is wonderful that you brought up the $50,000. Transparency in business is vital, especially when dealing with such esteemed potential investors." William Thorne tilted his head. His interest suddenly piqued. Harrison froze, his hand hovering over his wine glass. Beatrice stepped toward me, her voice dropping to an urgent, panicked whisper meant only for my ears. "Clara, sit down right now. Turn that microphone off." I ignored her. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and plugged the waiting HDMI cable directly into the charging port. "When a family business secures a major capital injection," I said to the crowd, keeping my eyes locked on Harrison, "it is important to acknowledge exactly who funded the venture." I tapped the screen of my phone. The heavy projector overhead whirred to life. A brilliant beam of light hit the descending screen. But it did not show a photograph of a smiling toddler. It displayed a high-resolution scan of a bank withdrawal slip. The image was 10 feet tall, impossible to miss. The dining room went dead silent. The only sound was the low hum of the projector fan. "This," I said, gesturing to the screen, "is the source of Harrison's recent funding. It is an education trust fund. Specifically, it is the college savings account my husband and I built over 18 years for the young woman whose birthday you are supposedly celebrating tonight." A collective murmur rippled through the tables. Several guests leaned forward, squinting at the glowing document. "You will notice the authorization signature at the bottom of the slip," I continued, my voice acting as a surgical instrument dissecting the crime. "It spells my name. But as a certified financial fraud investigator, I spend my days analyzing forged documents." I tapped my phone again. The screen split in half. On the left remained the forged slip. On the right appeared the 4 crumpled pieces of heavy cardstock I had retrieved from Beatrice's wastebasket. The dozens of practiced, looping signatures filled the screen. "These are the practice sheets used to perfect that forgery," I stated. "They were recovered from my mother's home office. She executed the theft. She drained her granddaughter's future to zero and handed a cashier's check to her son." Beatrice lost all the color in her face. The flawless matriarch mask cracked, revealing raw, unfiltered panic. She reached out to grab the microphone from my hand, but she stumbled on the hem of her expensive gown, catching herself on the wooden edge of the podium. "This is a lie!" Beatrice gasped, her voice shrill and echoing without the aid of a microphone. "She is having a mental break! Turn that screen off!" I did not flinch. I tapped my phone one final time. The screen shifted to a complex digital routing ledger, highlighting a series of wire transfers. Alongside the financial data were 3 still images pulled from the encrypted flash drive. They showed the Nevada Holding Company registry and a clear time-stamped photograph of Harrison conducting business inside an underground sports betting hub. Harrison did not invest this stolen money into a logistics firm, I announced to the silent, horrified room. He wired it across state lines to a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange to pay off debts owed to an illicit gambling syndicate. I looked directly at William Thorne. The real estate magnate had pushed his chair away from the table. He was staring at Harrison with open disgust, recognizing the immense legal and financial liability sitting next to him. Harrison realized the walls had closed in. The smug, arrogant posture evaporated. He looked like a trapped animal. He dropped his linen napkin on the floor, knocked over his chair, and began backing away from the table, his eyes darting toward the heavy swinging doors leading to the kitchen and the rear exit. He thought he could slip out the back and disappear into the night. He thought the worst thing happening to him was public humiliation. He had no idea what was waiting for him at the bottom of the service elevator. The silence in the dining room shattered the moment Harrison moved. He did not issue a denial. He did not attempt to defend his honor. He simply bolted. He knocked his heavy wooden chair backward, sending it crashing onto the polished hardwood floor. He bumped into a waitstaff cart, rattling a tray of crystal water pitchers, and practically sprinted toward the narrow hallway leading to the kitchen. He abandoned his mother at the podium without a second thought. William Thorne watched Harrison flee. The real estate magnate calmly reached for his linen napkin, wiped the corners of his mouth, and tossed the fabric onto his untouched dessert plate. He stood up, offered a curt nod to his wife, and the two of them walked out of the private wing without uttering a single syllable. In Beatrice's world, William Thorne walking away was a death sentence. It was the ultimate social rejection, broadcast live in front of her entire peer group. Beatrice watched the Thornes leave. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the horrified faces of the judges, the board members, and the local politicians she had spent decades cultivating. The pristine illusion of her elite dynasty was burning to the ground, ignited by the daughter she had always treated as a disposable stepping stone. She panicked. When a narcissist loses control of the narrative, they inevitably pivot to playing the victim. Beatrice stumbled away from the podium. She placed a trembling hand over her collarbone, clutching her pearls. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. She swayed on her expensive heels, leaning heavily against the nearest dining table as if her legs could no longer support her weight. She let out a weak, theatrical gasp. "How could you do this?" Beatrice cried out. Her voice shook with manufactured devastation. She looked at the crowd, pleading for an audience to validate her performance. "Look at what she is doing! My own daughter! She has always been so jealous of her brother, so bitter. She fabricated this entire presentation to ruin a beautiful evening. She is trying to give me a heart attack." Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few of the older women murmured, clearly unsure if they should intervene or call a paramedic. Beatrice noticed their hesitation and doubled down. She pressed both hands to her chest, squeezing her eyes shut, and let a single, calculated tear roll down her cheek. "This is a private family matter," Beatrice pleaded, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. "It is a misunderstanding over a simple bank transfer. We handle our disputes at home. We do not drag our blood through the mud in front of our dear friends. Clara, turn off that screen and sit down before you destroy whatever is left of this family." I stood at the soundboard holding the microphone. I watched her fake medical episode with cold, analytical precision. For 38 years, that exact routine had kept me in line. Whenever I raised a valid concern, whenever I asked for basic respect, she would clutch her chest, claim her blood pressure was spiking, and blame my selfishness for her failing health. The guilt would force me into submission. Not tonight. Tonight, the guilt was gone. I lifted the microphone back to my mouth. My voice echoed through the high ceilings of the Azure room, cutting right through her performance. "You are not having a heart attack, Mother," I said evenly. "You are having a realization. There is a profound difference." Beatrice opened her eyes. The fake frailty vanished for a split second, replaced by pure, unadulterated hatred, before she remembered the 50 pairs of eyes watching her every move. And you are incorrect about the nature of this situation, I continued, pacing slowly toward the center of the room. This is not a private family matter. A private family matter is a disagreement over holiday seating arrangements. A private family matter is favoritism. What you and Harrison orchestrated is a textbook violation of Title 18 of the United States Code. I gestured to the massive glowing projection screen still illuminating the far wall. The routing numbers and the Nevada Syndicate Registry loomed over the room like a digital guillotine. Stealing $50,000 from an 18-year-old girl is grand larceny, I stated, ensuring every syllable carried to the back rows. Forging my signature on bank documents is identity theft, and funneling that stolen money across state lines into an unregulated sports betting syndicate transforms your little misunderstanding into federal wire fraud and money laundering. The word federal acted like a physical shockwave in the room. The local socialites did not care about family drama, they thrived on it, but federal racketeering was a different animal entirely. The affluent crowd sitting at those tables understood the devastating consequences of proximity to a federal investigation. They knew about asset seizures, they knew about subpoenas, they knew that attending a dinner party funded by laundered money could invite auditors into their own pristine portfolios. The social contagion effect was immediate. A state senator sitting near the front tapped his glass, signaling his aides. They stood up in unison and headed for the cloakroom. The president of the local country club refused to make eye contact with Beatrice, quietly pulling his wife out of her chair and steering her toward the exit. The guests did not just judge her, they actively recoiled. They physically distanced themselves from her as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. Beatrice watched her entire social empire disintegrate. Decades of carefully curated charity dinners, golf tournaments, and calculated handshakes were erased in 2 minutes. She reached out, trying to grab the arm of a passing city councilwoman. "Martha, please," Beatrice begged, dropping the fake heart attack entirely. "You know me. You know I would never do something like this." "My daughter is unhinged." The councilwoman pulled her arm away sharply. She looked at Beatrice with a mixture of pity and revulsion. "Do not call my office, Beatrice," the woman said quietly. "Do not ever call my office again." The mask fell off. The polite, refined matriarch snapped. Beatrice turned toward me, her face flushed with genuine rage. She pointed a shaking finger at my chest. "You ungrateful wretch!" she screamed, her voice losing all its cultivated polish, echoing harshly in the half-empty dining room. "I gave you everything. I put a roof over your head. I tolerated your mediocre husband. I allowed you to be part of this family. You are nothing without me. You hear me? You are nothing." I looked at her, feeling a strange, hollow peace. I did not feel the urge to scream back. I did not feel the need to justify my existence to her anymore. The woman standing before me was not a mother. She was simply a criminal realizing her reign was over. While Beatrice raged in the dining room, Harrison was fighting his own battle in the back of the house. He had sprinted down the narrow, dimly lit hallway and shoved his way through the heavy swinging doors into the commercial kitchen. The heat from the industrial stoves hit him like a physical wall. The executive chef and a dozen line cooks stopped chopping vegetables, staring in confusion as a man in a velvet dinner jacket scrambled past the prep stations, slipping wildly on the grease-slick tile floor. Harrison ignored them. He was operating on pure adrenaline and cowardice. He ducked under a hanging rack of copper pots, his expensive loafers struggling to find traction. His chest heaved. His designer watch caught the harsh fluorescent lighting. He just needed to get to the alleyway. He needed to find his car, drive to the nearest automated teller machine, drain whatever cash he had left, and figure out an exit strategy. He reached the back of the kitchen. The heavy steel emergency door loomed ahead, marked by an illuminated red exit sign. Harrison lunged forward. He slammed his body weight against the red metal crash bar. The thick steel mechanism clanked loudly, echoing over the sizzle of the grills behind him. But the door did not swing open. It rattled inside its reinforced frame, holding firm against his momentum. "Ugh," Harrison grunted, stepping back and throwing his shoulder against the painted metal. He hit the crash bar again. He pounded his fists against the thick steel. The door remained entirely immovable. He froze. His breathing echoed loudly in his own ears. He looked at the small, square pane of frosted safety glass embedded in the upper half of the door. Through the thick, reinforced glass, illuminated by the amber glow of the alleyway street lamps, Harrison saw a silhouette. Someone was standing calmly on the other side of the exit. The shadow shifted. A man stepped closer to the frosted glass. Even through the distorted pane, Harrison could see the clear, unmistakable yellow letters printed across a dark federal windbreaker. FBI. The panic finally took him. He turned around, pressing his back against the cold steel, staring wildly at the kitchen staff. There was nowhere left to run. The final insult hung in the stagnant air of the dining room. "You are nothing without me." Beatrice stood breathing heavily, expecting me to shrink away, waiting for the ingrained obedience she had relied upon for nearly 4 decades. Instead, the heavy brass double doors at the main entrance of the private wing swung open. They did not crash or bang. They opened with a smooth, terrifying finality. Special Agent Thomas Reed walked into the room. He wore a dark suit, his federal badge clipped clearly to his belt. Behind him followed 3 plainclothes agents. There were no flashing weapons or screaming tactical units. The sheer gravity of federal agents entering an elite invitation-only event was paralyzing enough. The ambient noise of the restaurant vanished. The string quartet had long since fled, leaving only the sound of leather shoes crossing the polished hardwood floor. Beatrice turned her head. Her jaw went slack. The sight of law enforcement ruining her perfect aesthetic caused her brain to misfire. She instinctively reverted to the only defense mechanism she knew, attempting to assert her manufactured authority. "Excuse me," Beatrice snapped, stepping away from the podium and marching towards Special Agent Reed. "This is a private event. You cannot just barge in here. I will call the city commissioner." Thomas Reed did not slow his pace. He did not offer a polite smile. He stopped 3 feet away from her, pulling a folded stack of stapled papers from his inner jacket pocket. "Beatrice Miller," Reed stated. His voice was a flat, uncompromising baritone that carried no respect for her social standing. "I am a federal agent. The city commissioner has no jurisdiction here. You are under arrest." Beatrice blinked. "Arrest," she scoffed, letting out a breathless laugh. "This is a family dispute over a bank account. Tell your people to leave before I sue for harassment." Reed opened the warrant. He read the charges aloud, forcing the elite audience to hear every single detail. Identity theft, financial forgery, accessory to grand larceny, and suspicion of conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud. The word conspiracy echoed off the glass walls. The reality pierced her veil. Beatrice realized this was not a local scandal she could bury. Her panic mutated into blind, irrational fury. She spun around, her eyes locking onto me. She let out a guttural sound and lunged toward my face. She never made contact. A female federal agent stepped forward smoothly, intercepting Beatrice's wrist. There was no theatrical struggle. The agent simply twisted my mother's arm behind her back with undeniable, practiced force. The sharp metallic ratcheting sound of the handcuffs locking around Beatrice's wrists cut through her shrieks. It was the sound of a 40-year reign of emotional terror coming to a definitive end. At that exact moment, the heavy swinging doors leading to the commercial kitchen opened. Harrison emerged. He was not walking. He was being firmly escorted by 2 more agents in dark windbreakers. His velvet dinner jacket was smeared with white flour and grease. The $15,000 stolen watch slipped down his wrist as he struggled weakly against the agent securing his arms. "Mom!" Harrison yelled, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "Mom, tell him to stop!
Tell them it was your idea. Tell them you gave me the money.
He threw her under the bus without a second thought. The golden child immediately offered her up to save his own skin. It was the ultimate betrayal, broadcast live. Beatrice stared at her son in handcuffed silence. For the first time in her life, she had no response. The golden illusion shattered. "Escort them out," Reed instructed calmly. The officers marched Beatrice and Harrison down the center aisle of the dining room. They walked past the empty chairs and the abandoned dessert plates. The few remaining guests turned their faces away, refusing to make eye contact with the disgraced duo. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the city. 10 stories below, the street was lined with law enforcement vehicles. The alternating flashes of red and blue emergency lights pulsed against the asphalt, casting a rhythmic neon glow that traveled all the way up the side of the building and reflected inside the dark dining room. The colorful strobes painted the walls, washing over the remnants of the failed celebration. I turned away from the window. David and Chloe were still standing near the frozen ice sculpture. My husband did not look upset about being kept in the dark regarding the Federal Bureau. He understood the tactical necessity of my silence. He saw the magnitude of the threat I had neutralized to protect our family. He walked across the room, wrapping his arms tightly around my shoulders, pressing a kiss to my temple. Chloe stepped forward next. She looked at the empty podium, the discarded microphone, and then at me. There was no fear in her eyes. There was only profound respect. She had watched her mother dismantle an abusive hierarchy with precision and facts, proving that true strength does not require screaming. True strength is quietly gathering the evidence and ensuring the threat can never hurt you again. The tumors had been surgically extracted. The poison was gone. We stood together in the flashing neon light, finally breathing clean air. 6 months have passed since the flashing emergency lights painted the walls of that downtown dining room. Today, my house smells like fresh cardboard and laundry detergent. I spent the entire morning sitting on the floor of my daughter Chloe's bedroom, helping her wrap winter sweaters in tissue paper and pack them into heavy moving boxes. Tomorrow morning, David and I will load those boxes into the back of our car and drive her 4 hours north to the university campus she worked so hard to reach. She did not have to settle. She did not have to take out predatory student loans. The morning after the arrests, I walked into the local branch of the bank that managed the education trust. I bypassed the standard teller line and sat directly inside the branch manager's office. I handed him the federal indictment paperwork, the digital routing ledger, and the forged signature cards. Because the theft was now classified as part of an active federal racketeering investigation, the bank had zero leverage to delay or deny my claim. Their internal fraud insurance activated immediately. Less than 48 hours later, I logged into my home office computer, pulled up the dashboard, and watched the font turn from black to bold green. The $50,000 was fully restored. My husband David never faced a single question from the local school board regarding the scandal. Because I kept the investigation sealed at the federal level, insulated from municipal gossip, the local newspapers ran the story without ever dragging his name into the print. 2 months after the disastrous birthday dinner, he stood in front of the district superintendent and accepted his promotion to vice principal. He earned his position through years of quiet dedication, proving that genuine respect is built, never extorted. The same cannot be said for the rest of my bloodline. Harrison is currently residing in a low-security federal correctional institution in the desert. The velvet dinner jackets and the Italian leather loafers are gone, replaced by a standard-issue khaki uniform. When the federal prosecutors offered him a plea deal in exchange for testifying against the Nevada syndicate, he sang like a bird. He offered up every name, every routing number, and every contact he possessed to save his own skin. It did not matter. The syndicate bosses had already isolated him, treating him as a disposable pawn. The judge handed him a 5-year sentence without the possibility of early parole. The parasitic lifestyle he enjoyed for 4 decades finally met a host he could not manipulate. There are no affluent girlfriends to drain in a federal cell block. There is no mother waiting to write him a cashier's check. Beatrice is facing a different kind of prison. She managed to post bail the morning after the raid, leveraging the equity in her sprawling colonial house to secure her release pending trial. The judge confiscated her passport and ordered her to wear a GPS ankle monitor. She is currently trapped on house arrest inside the very home she used as a stage to project her superiority. But the physical confinement is not her true punishment. Her actual sentence is the profound, suffocating silence of her social exile. In the affluent circles my mother spent a lifetime courting, reputation is the only currency that matters. The moment the word federal entered the conversation, she became a pariah. William Thorne pulled all his investments out of her associated charities. The country club board held an emergency vote and revoked her membership. The city council members blocked her phone number. The women who used to drink expensive wine in her marble kitchen now cross the street when they walk past her manicured driveway. She is entirely alone. She sits in her pristine, empty house, staring out the bay windows, watching the world move on without her. She craved an audience her entire life, and now the theater is permanently empty. Yesterday afternoon, I walked out to my mailbox and found a thick manila envelope resting inside. The return address belonged to a high-profile criminal defense firm downtown. I took the envelope into my home office, sat down at my desk, and sliced the paper open with a brass letter opener. Inside was a single piece of heavy cream-colored cardstock. It was the exact same premium stationery she had used to practice forging my signature. The letter was written in her looping, elegant cursive. I read the words carefully. Clara, my dearest daughter, I am writing this to you because I am a frail, terrified old woman. I recognize that mistakes were made, but they were born out of a mother's desperate love for her struggling son. The trial begins next month. The prosecutors are asking for significant jail time. You are my only daughter. We share the same blood. I am begging you to contact the district attorney and submit a statement of leniency on my behalf. Tell them we have reconciled. Tell them we are a family. We only have each other. Please, Clara, find it in your heart to forgive me. I laid the thick cardstock on my desk. I looked at the ink strokes. I analyzed the tone. There was no genuine remorse. There was no apology for stealing from Chloe. There was no acknowledgement of the terror she inflicted on my husband. The letter was just another tactical maneuver. She needed a character witness to save herself from a concrete cell, and she assumed my lifelong conditioning would compel me to rescue her one last time. She thought the word family was a magic spell that would erase the past. I did not shed a single tear. My pulse did not elevate. I picked up the heavy cardstock, turned in my chair, and reached under my desk. I pressed the power button on the heavy-duty industrial document shredder I use for my fraud investigations. The steel gears hummed to life. I fed the edge of the cream-colored paper into the metal slot. The blades caught the stationery, pulling it downward with a loud, satisfying crunch. I watched her manufactured sentiment, her manipulation, and her final desperate plea get ground into tiny, illegible strips of confetti. I unplugged the machine and walked out of the office. There is a dangerous myth woven into the fabric of our society. It is the belief that biology dictates obligation. We are taught to endure financial abuse and emotional manipulation simply because the person inflicting the pain shares our genetic code. But true love is a protective barrier. You do not owe your sanity to the people who chose a golden child over you. Walking away does not make you cold. It makes you a responsible guardian of your own peace. My name is Clara Miller. The empire of lies my mother built has been dismantled, and my family is finally breathing clean air. That is how my story ends. Now, I want to hear yours. If you were standing in my shoes, would you have written that letter of leniency to keep your mother out of federal prison? Or would you feed that manipulation right into the shredder like I did? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. If you have ever had to cut the cord on a toxic family member to protect your own children, hit the subscribe button to join our community here at Sweet Life Drama. You are not alone, and you never have to tolerate their poison again. Thank you for listening, stay strong, and I will see you in the next video.